Thunder cracked across the dusty horizon of Silver Creek as Nora Fisher stumbled down the main street, her once fine dress torn and muddied, tears streaming down her face as she clutched a small leather satchel to her chest. It was 1876, and the small Wyoming town had seen its share of peculiar sights, but the sight of a proper young woman running, as if the devil himself chased her, caused even the most hardened townsfolk to pause. She was running from something, or someone, that much was clear to the onlookers gathering on the wooden boardwalks. Her chestnut hair had come undone from its pins, falling in wild disarray around her shoulders. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, mingling with the tears that seemed endless. "Stop her!" came a distant shout from the edge of town. A man on horseback was galloping towards Silver Creek, his face contorted with rage. "That woman is my property." Nora stumbled, falling to her knees in the middle of the street. The townsfolk watched, frozen, as she struggled to rise. The approaching horseman was gaining ground, his spurs glinting in the harsh afternoon sun. From the hitching post outside the saloon, a tall figure detached himself from the shadows. Thomas Zimmerman, known throughout the territory simply as Thorn, stepped into the street, dust kicking up around his worn leather boots. His face, partially hidden beneath the brim of a weather-beaten Stetson, revealed little emotion, but his eyes tracked the desperate woman and the approaching rider with calculated precision. With unhurried strides, Thorn crossed the distance between himself and the fallen woman. The entire town held its breath as he offered his hand, palm up, to the frightened runaway. "Madam," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence that had fallen over Silver Creek. Nora looked up through tear-soaked lashes, her gaze meeting his. In that moment of connection, something unspoken passed between them. Without hesitation, she placed her trembling hand in his. The horseman was nearly upon them now. "That woman belongs to me," he shouted, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. In one fluid motion, Thorn helped Nora to her feet and positioned himself between her and the approaching threat. His own hand hovered near his holster, but he didn't draw. "Seems to me," Thorn said quietly, though his words carried, "that no person can belong to another. Not in these United States. She's my fiancé." The man reined his horse to a stop, foam flecking the animal's mouth from the hard ride. "Nora, you get back here this instant." "I never agreed to marry you, Victor," Nora said, her voice gaining strength despite its tremor. "Your arrangement was with my stepfather, not with me." Victor Hargrove was well known in the neighboring town of Redemption Springs, a cattle baron's son with a mean streak as wide as the Wyoming territory. His face flushed an ugly red as he glared down at Nora and Thorn. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Both of you." Sheriff Mills emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. "What's the trouble here, folks?" Victor straightened in his saddle. "Sheriff, this woman has stolen property belonging to me. I demand her arrest." The sheriff looked at Nora, noting her disheveled appearance and the fear in her eyes. "What property might that be, Mr. Hargrove?" Victor pointed to the satchel clutched in Nora's arms. "Family heirlooms. Jewelry that belonged to my mother." Nora shook her head vehemently. "They were my mother's pieces. The only things I have left of her. My stepfather had no right to give them to you." The townspeople watched the unfolding drama with undisguised interest. It wasn't often that Silver Creek saw such entertainment. Sheriff Mills scratched his gray stubbled chin. "This sounds like a civil matter to me. Mr. Hargrove, if you have a claim, you can file it properly through the courts." "I don't need courts when I have the law on my side," Victor snarled, his hand still hovering near his gun. Thorn's voice was calm, but carried a steely undertone. "You'd be wise to listen to the sheriff, Hargrove. The lady's made her choice clear enough." Victor's eyes narrowed as he assessed Thorn. Recognition dawned on his face. "Zimmerman, I should have known. Always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." He looked from Thorn to the sheriff, then back to Nora. "This isn't over." With a sharp jerk on the reins, he turned his horse and rode back the way he had come, dust billowing in his wake. The crowd began to disperse, sensing the immediate drama had concluded, though many lingered nearby, eager to see what might happen next. "Thank you," Nora whispered to Thorn, her legs still shaking. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." "Don't mention it," he replied, releasing her hand which he'd still been holding. You got somewhere to stay, Mississippi. Fisher. Nora Fisher. And no, I just arrived. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Sheriff Mills approached them, pushing his hat back on his balding head. Miss Fisher, I'd recommend you stay in town for a few days at least. Hargrove isn't known for giving up easily. I have very little money, she admitted, clutching her satchel tighter. Martha at the boarding house might have a room, the sheriff suggested. She's been known to work out arrangements for those in need. Thorn's expression remained unreadable as he studied Nora. I'll escort you there, he offered. Hargrove might double back. Relief washed over Nora's face. I'm in your debt, Mr. Zimmerman. Thorn, he corrected. Just Thorn. As they walked toward the boarding house at the end of the street, curious eyes followed them. Nora was acutely aware of the whispers that trailed in their wake. By sundown, every soul in Silver Creek would know of the runaway woman and the infamous Thorn Zimmerman who had come to her aid. The boarding house was a two-story clapboard building painted a fading blue with white trim. Martha Wilkins, a stout woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun, answered the door with a wooden spoon in hand. Well, she said, looking Nora up and down. You look like you've been through the ringer, child. Thorn removed his hat. Miss Fisher needs a room, Martha. She's had some trouble. Martha's eyes softened slightly. So I heard. News travels faster than telegrams in Silver Creek. She stepped aside. Come in, then. We'll get you settled. Inside, Martha led them to a small parlor while she prepared a room. Nora sank gratefully into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Why was Hargrove chasing you? Thorn asked quietly, remaining standing near the doorway. Nora hesitated, then decided honesty was her best course. My mother died last winter. My stepfather wasted no time in arranging my marriage to Victor Hargrove. The Hargroves have money and influence, and my stepfather has gambling debts. She glanced down at her satchel. These jewels are all I have left of my mother. He tried to give them to Victor as part of the arrangement. And you ran. Yes. She met his eyes defiantly. I refuse to be bartered like cattle. A ghost of a smile touched Thorn's lips. Can't say I blame you. Martha returned, wiping her hands on her apron. Room's ready upstairs, first door on the right. It's not fancy, but it's clean. Thank you. But I'm afraid I can't pay much. Martha waved away her concerns. We can discuss that tomorrow. For now, you need rest and a hot meal. Thorn placed his hat back on his head. I'll be going then. Mr. Zimmerman Thorn, Nora said, rising from her chair. I don't know how to thank you. No need. He nodded to both women and turned to leave. Will I see you again? Nora asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Thorn paused at the door, looking back at her with those intense eyes that seemed to see right through her. It's a small town, Miss Fisher. I reckon our paths will cross. As he stepped out into the fading light, Martha chuckled. My, I've known Thorn Zimmerman for 5 years, and I believe that's the most I've ever heard him speak at one time. Nora felt a blush warming her cheeks. What is he? A gunslinger. He's been many things, Martha replied enigmatically. But mostly, he keeps to himself. Works as a ranch hand at the Triple R when he needs money, does some bounty hunting when necessary. He's good with horses. She patted Nora's arm. Come now, let's get you cleaned up and fed. That night, in a narrow bed beneath a patchwork quilt, Nora lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Silver Creek. The piano music from the saloon down the street, occasional bursts of laughter, the creaking of the boarding house as it settled. Her thoughts kept returning to Thorn Zimmerman and the way his calloused hand had felt when he'd helped her up. Despite the uncertainty of her situation, for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. Morning arrived with the scent of coffee and bacon wafting up from Martha's kitchen. Nora dressed in the cleanest of her few garments, a simple blue calico dress, and tried to make herself presentable. The cut on her forehead had scabbed over, but her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman who had clearly been through an ordeal. Downstairs, Martha was serving breakfast to her other boarders, 2 elderly sisters who taught at the schoolhouse and a rail-thin man who worked at the assayer's office. They greeted Nora with curious but kind smiles, and no one mentioned her dramatic arrival. Eat up, Martha instructed, placing a heaping plate before Nora. Then we'll talk about how you might earn your keep while you're with us. Nora ate gratefully, realizing she hadn't had a proper meal since fleeing Redemption Springs. I can clean, Cook. So, can you read and write? Martha asked. Nora nodded. Yes, very well. My mother insisted on a proper education. Martha exchanged glances with the elderly sisters. Well now, that might be providential. Our schoolteacher, Miss Abernathy, broke her hip last month. Her sisters here have been struggling to manage all the children. We'd welcome the help. The older sister, Agnes, confirmed. Even if just temporarily. Nora felt a surge of relief. I'd be honored to assist. After breakfast, Martha provided Nora with a few essential toiletries and a second-hand shawl. The school's just down the street, past the general store. The children would benefit from your attention this very day, if you're willing. With a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in some time, Nora set off toward the schoolhouse. Silver Creek looked different in the morning light, less threatening, more welcoming. Several townsfolk nodded in greeting as she passed, word of her situation having evidently spread. The schoolhouse was a modest building with a small bell tower. Inside, about 20 children of varying ages sat at wooden desks, their attention scattered without proper supervision. The elderly sisters had clearly been overwhelmed. Children, Agnes announced, this is Miss Fisher. She will be helping us until Miss Abernathy returns. 20 pairs of curious eyes fixed on Nora. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, determined to make herself useful. The morning passed quickly as Nora found her rhythm with the children. By lunchtime, she had already earned their respect with her firm but kind approach to teaching. As the children spilled outside to eat their packed lunches, Nora stepped onto the schoolhouse porch for a moment of fresh air. Across the street, leaning against a hitching post, was Thorn. Their eyes met, and he touched the brim of his hat in silent greeting. Nora smiled and, after a moment's hesitation, crossed the dusty street toward him. Are you keeping watch over me, Mr. Zimmerman? She asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. Heard you were teaching. Thought I'd see for myself. And seems you've got a knack for it. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with small talk. Hargrove's still in the area, staying at the hotel in Redemption Springs. Nora's smile faded. I see. You should be careful, he advised. Man like that doesn't take kindly to being refused. I'm not afraid, Nora said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Thorn regarded her with those penetrating eyes. Maybe you should be. Before she could respond, a small boy tugged at her skirt. Miss Fisher, Jimmy and Sarah are fighting over the swing. Nora sighed. Duty calls. Thank you for the warning, Thorn. As she turned to handle the playground dispute, Thorn called after her. I'm riding out to the Triple R this afternoon. Won't be back for a few days. She paused, looking back at him. I'll be here when you return. Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. He nodded once, then turned and walked away. The days fell into a pattern as Nora adapted to life in Silver Creek. The teaching position provided structure and purpose, while evenings at Martha's boarding house offered companionship and safety. She wrote to her cousin in Denver, explaining her situation and asking for help, though she knew any response would take weeks to arrive. True to his word, Thorn disappeared for several days. Nora found herself watching the road into town more often than she cared to admit, a fact that didn't escape Martha's notice. That man has quite an effect on the ladies, Martha commented one evening as they sat on the porch shelling peas. Though I've never seen him show particular interest in return. I'm merely grateful for his help, Nora replied primly. Martha's knowing smile suggested she believed otherwise, but was kind enough not to press the matter. On the 5th day after Thorn's departure, Victor Hargrove returned to Silver Creek. He rode in with 2 men flanking him, their expressions hard as they dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. Nora was walking back from the schoolhouse when she spotted them. She quickened her pace toward the boarding house, hoping to avoid a confrontation, but Victor's voice called out behind her. Nora, stop right there. She froze, then slowly turned to face him. The street had grown quiet, townsfolk pausing to watch the unfolding scene. Victor approached, his expensive boots kicking up dust as he walked. I've filed formal charges against you for theft, he announced loudly. Sheriff Mills has the papers. You're coming back to Redemption Springs to face judgment. Sheriff Mills emerged from his office, looking uncomfortable. Miss Fisher, I'm afraid Mr. Hargrove has indeed filed a complaint. I'll need you to come answer some questions. Nora's heart raced, but she kept her composure. The jewelry belonged to my mother. I have letters proving they were left to me. That's for a judge to decide, Victor said smugly. In the meantime, I expect them returned to me for safekeeping. That won't be happening, came a familiar voice. All heads turned to see Thorn Zimmerman riding into town, dust coating his clothes from the trail. He dismounted smoothly, his eyes never leaving Victor as he approached. This doesn't concern you, Zimmerman, Victor snapped. Actually, it does. Thorn handed a folded document to Sheriff Mills. Just rode in from Cheyenne. Had a chat with Judge Crawford about Miss Fisher's situation. The sheriff unfolded the paper, his eyebrows rising as he read. This is a restraining order against Mr. Hargrove, prohibiting him from approaching within 50 feet of Miss Fisher. He looked up at Victor. Signed by Judge Crawford himself. Victor's face turned crimson. That's impossible. How did you? The judge was quite interested to hear about your arrangement with Mr. Fisher. Thorn continued calmly. Seems forcing a woman into marriage isn't looked upon favorably, especially when it involves financial coercion. A ripple of murmurs passed through the gathering crowd. Victor looked around, suddenly aware that public opinion was turning against him. This isn't over, he hissed, but the threat sounded hollow. Sheriff Mills stepped forward. I think it is, Mr. Hargrove. I suggest you and your men return to Redemption Springs. The complaint against Miss Fisher is dismissed. For a moment, it seemed Victor might challenge the sheriff's authority, but after a tense silence, he turned on his heel. Mount up, he ordered his men. As he swung into his saddle, he fixed Nora with a venomous glare. You've made a powerful enemy today, Miss Fisher. And some powerful friends, Sheriff Mills replied pointedly. The townsfolk watched as Victor and his men rode out, then gradually dispersed, satisfied that the excitement was over for the day. Nora approached Thorn, her eyes shining with gratitude and something more. You rode all the way to Cheyenne? For me. Thorn shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. Seemed the right thing to do. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it. She hesitated, then asked, how did you convince the judge? Showed him the letters you mentioned. The ones proving the jewelry was your mother's. Nora's eyes widened. But how did you get those? They were in my satchel. Martha helped, he admitted. Hope you don't mind. Figured it was better than letting Hargrove drag you back to Redemption Springs. Before she could respond, Sheriff Mills joined them. That was good work, Thorn. Though I suspect Hargrove won't take this lying down. Let him try something, Thorn said, his hand resting lightly on his holster. The sheriff shook his head. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. He tipped his hat to Nora. Miss Fisher, I apologize for the scare. You're free to continue your stay in Silver Creek without worry. As the sheriff walked away, Nora found herself alone with Thorn in the middle of the street. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows around them. You must be tired after your journey, she said softly. I've had worse rides. His eyes met hers, and for once, he didn't look away. Heard you've been doing well with the school children. I enjoy teaching, Nora replied, touched that he'd inquired about her. It gives me purpose. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Thorn cleared his throat. I should see to my horse. Of course. Nora tried to hide her disappointment. Perhaps I could buy you dinner? To thank you properly for everything you've done. Thorn hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to such invitations. No need for that. I insist, Nora pressed. Martha serves a fine meal at the boarding house. 7 o'clock. After a long moment, Thorn nodded. 7 it is. Nora hurried back to the boarding house, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Martha, upon hearing about the dinner invitation, immediately set about preparing her finest dishes. That man hasn't had a proper home-cooked meal in years, I'd wager, she declared, rolling out pie dough with determined strokes. And he certainly hasn't dined with a lovely young woman. It's just a thank you, Nora insisted, though the flutter in her stomach suggested otherwise. Martha's knowing smile returned. Of course it is, dear. Now, go make yourself presentable while I finish here. Upstairs, Nora washed the dust of the day away and changed into her one good dress, a deep green garment that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes. She brushed her chestnut hair until it shone, pinning it up in a simple but elegant style. The woman in the mirror looked different from the frightened runaway who had stumbled into Silver Creek weeks ago. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock came at the boarding house door. Nora's heart skipped as she heard Martha greeting Thorn downstairs. Taking a deep breath, she descended the stairs. Thorn stood in the entryway, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in his cleanest shirt. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, a reaction that sent a warm thrill through Nora. "Miss Fisher," he greeted, his voice raspier than usual. "Nora, please," she corrected with a smile. "After all you've done for me, I think we can dispense with formalities." Martha ushered them into the dining room where she'd set a small table for two, complete with her best china and a vase of wildflowers. "I'll serve and then make myself scarce," she announced. "The other boarders are dining in town tonight." The meal was indeed Martha's finest roast beef with potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. At first, conversation was halting, with Thorn offering short responses to Nora's questions. But as the evening progressed, he gradually opened up, telling her about his days as a scout for the Army, his brief stint as a deputy in Kansas, and how he'd eventually found his way to Wyoming. "And your family?" Nora asked as Martha cleared away the dinner plates. Something dark passed over Thorn's face. "Lost them in the war. Confederate raiders." "I'm so sorry," Nora said, instantly regretting her question. "It was a long time ago." Thorn studied her across the table. "What about you? Besides the stepfather, any family left?" "A cousin in Denver," Nora replied. "I've written to her, but haven't received a response yet. And my mother's sister lives in Boston, though we haven't spoken in years." Martha returned with the pie, setting it between them. "I'll leave you two to enjoy dessert," she said with a wink at Nora. Once they were alone again, Thorn leaned forward slightly. "What will you do now? Stay in Silver Creek?" The question caught Nora off guard. She'd been so focused on escaping Victor that she hadn't thought much about her future. I'm not sure. The teaching position is temporary. Once Miss Abernathy recovers." "You could stay," Thorn said, then quickly added, "Town could use someone with your education. Children seem to like you." Nora felt a rush of warmth at his words. "I've grown fond of Silver Creek," she admitted. "And its people." Their eyes met across the table, and this time neither looked away. Something unspoken passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. The moment was shattered by the sound of breaking glass from the front of the house, followed by Martha's startled cry. Thorn was on his feet instantly, his hand going to his gun as he moved toward the sound. Nora followed close behind, her heart pounding. In the front parlor, they found Martha standing over a broken window, a rock with a paper wrapped around it lying amidst the shattered glass. Thorn picked it up carefully, unwrapping the note. His expression hardened as he read it. "What does it say?" Nora asked, though she already suspected the answer. "It's from Hargrove," Thorn confirmed grimly. "This isn't over. What's mine will return to me." Martha clutched her chest. "That horrible man. I'm going to fetch the sheriff." As Martha hurried out, Thorn moved to the window, scanning the darkness outside. "He's gone," he said after a moment. "But he'll be back." Nora wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. "I've brought trouble to your door, to everyone in Silver Creek. Perhaps I should leave after all." "And go where?" Thorn turned to face her. "Hargrove would only follow. Man like that doesn't give up easily." "Then what do you suggest?" Thorn was quiet for a long moment. "I've got a small cabin, outside of town, near the R. Not much, but it's defensible. You'd be safer there until this blows over." The offer surprised Nora. You'd let me stay in your home." "I'd stay at the bunkhouse," he clarified quickly. "Give you your privacy." Before Nora could respond, Sheriff Mills arrived with Martha. After examining the rock and note, he agreed with Thorn's assessment. "Hargrove's making it personal now," the sheriff said gravely. "Thorn's idea makes sense, Miss Fisher. At least until we can be sure Hargrove has moved on." Martha didn't look entirely convinced. "A single woman, staying at a bachelor's cabin? What will people say?" "They'll say she's alive," Thorn replied bluntly. The discussion continued late into the night, but by morning the decision was made. Nora would temporarily relocate to Thorn's cabin, with Martha providing a chaperone during the day when Thorn was working at the ranch. The arrangement wasn't ideal, but it seemed the safest option given Victor's escalating threats. The cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms with simple furnishings, but it was clean and solidly built. It sat in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, with a small stream nearby and the Triple R Ranch visible in the distance. Nora found herself oddly at peace there, away from the curious eyes of Silver Creek. Each morning, Thorn would ride out to work with the Triple R's horses, returning in the evening to check on her before heading to the bunkhouse for the night. Martha would arrive mid-morning with supplies and company, sometimes staying to prepare meals that she insisted both Nora and Thorn share. "That man's too thin," Martha would say as she kneaded bread dough or stirred stew. "Needs someone to look after him properly." Nora found herself growing increasingly comfortable in Thorn's presence. Their evening conversations on the cabin's porch became longer, his responses less terse. She learned about his dreams of someday having his own ranch, while she shared her love of literature and her hopes to someday travel to Europe as her mother had once done. 3 weeks into this arrangement, a response finally arrived from Nora's cousin in Denver. The letter was brief but heartening, an invitation to come stay, along with enough money for the stagecoach fare. Nora sat on the porch steps that evening, the letter in her hands, conflicted emotions churning within her. Safety and family awaited in Denver, yet the thought of leaving Silver Creek, of leaving Thorn, filled her with an unexpected sadness. "Good news?" Thorn asked as he approached from the bunkhouse, having finished his day's work. Nora handed him the letter. "My cousin has offered me a home in Denver." Thorn read it slowly, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "When will you go?" "The stage comes through on Friday." Nora watched his face carefully. "Unless there's a reason I should stay." Thorn returned the letter, his fingers briefly brushing against hers. "Silver Creek would miss its teacher. Is that all that would miss me?" The question hung in the air between them, bold in its directness. Thorn's eyes met hers, and for once, Nora could read the emotion in them clearly. "No," he admitted quietly. "Not all." Before either could say more, the sound of approaching horses broke the stillness of the evening. Thorn was immediately alert, his hand moving to his gun. "Get inside," he ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. "Lock the door." Nora hurried into the cabin, her heart racing as she secured the door behind her. Through the window, she saw 3 riders emerge from the trees, Victor Hargrove and his men. "Zimmerman," Victor called out, stopping his horse a safe distance away. "I know she's here. Send her out, and we can end this peacefully." Thorn stood his ground on the porch, his stance casual, but his hand never far from his holster. "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go, Hargrove." Victor dismounted, followed by his companions. "You've interfered enough. This is between me and my fiancé." "She's not your fiancé," Thorn replied evenly. "Never was. Judge Crawford made that clear enough." Victor's face twisted with anger. "Judges can be overruled. Or replaced. Not by you." Thorn's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. "Last chance, Hargrove. Right away. Don't come back." For a tense moment, the men stared each other down. Then Victor's hand moved toward his gun. Thorn was faster. His draw was smooth, practiced the movement of a man who had faced death before and lived. The shot cracked across the clearing, and Victor stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. His companions reached for their weapons, but Thorn's gun swung toward them. "Don't," he warned. The men froze, looking from Thorn to Victor, who was now on his knees, blood seeping between his fingers. "This isn't over," Victor gasped through gritted teeth. "Yes, it is," came Nora's voice as she stepped onto the porch, her mother's pistol in hand. "You don't own me, Victor. You never did. And if you ever come near me again, I won't aim for the shoulder." The determination in her voice seemed to finally penetrate Victor's arrogance. The reality of his situation, wounded, outdrawn, and outmatched, dawned in his eyes. "Help me up," he ordered his men, his voice weaker now. As they pulled him to his feet, he glared at Nora and Thorn. "You deserve each other," he spat, the words intended as an insult, but landing far from their mark. They watched as Victor's men helped him onto his horse, then all 3 riders disappeared back into the trees. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Thorn lower his gun. "You should have stayed inside," he said to Nora, though there was no anger in his voice. "I'm tired of hiding," she replied, setting the pistol down on the porch railing. "Tired of running." Thorn holstered his weapon and turned to face her fully. In the deepening twilight, his features were softened, the hardness that usually guarded his expression replaced by something vulnerable. Stay, he said simply. Nora's heart quickened. Here? At the cabin. In Silver Creek. Thorn took a step closer to her. With me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Nora could hardly believe she'd heard them correctly. Thorn, I'm not good with words, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. Never have been. But these past weeks, having you here. He gestured helplessly. I don't want you to go to Denver. Nora closed the distance between them, placing her hand gently on his chest. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palm. Ask me properly, she whispered. Thorn covered her hand with his own. Stay with me, Nora. Please. In answer, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Thorn's arms encircled her waist, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Is that a yes? He asked, a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Yes, Nora replied, her own smile radiant in the gathering darkness. I'll write to my cousin tomorrow. Tell her my plans have changed. That night, Thorn didn't return to the bunkhouse. They sat together on the porch until the stars filled the sky, talking of the future they might build together in Silver Creek, a future neither had dared to imagine just weeks before. 2 months later, the town that had once watched a terrified runaway weep in its street now gathered to witness a very different scene. In the small white church, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, Nora Fisher became Nora Zimmerman. Sheriff Mills gave the bride away, while Martha served as matron of honor, tears of joy streaming down her weathered cheeks. As they emerged from the church to the cheers of the townsfolk, Thorn took Nora's hand in his, just as he had on that first day. But this time, there was no fear between them, only the promise of the life they would build together. Silver Creek would remember their story for generations, how a desperate woman had found courage, how a solitary man had found love, and how a single extended hand had changed both their destinies forever.